Mike Burke is the co-chair of our advocacy group, and he will introduce our speaker. Mike, take it away.
You know, I was trying to think about to say something new about Bud Ward. He's like many of us, he's been around the block a couple times. And like many of us, still looks great. Ben is, I thought about calling him the father of environmental journalism. And then I decided that instead of that, I should call him, I don't know what you call a male midwife, the mid-husband, I guess, of environmental journalism. He started himself as an environmental journalist in 1974. And I can tell you that back in those days, very few, maybe none, of the newspapers and magazines, news magazines, had anything called an environmental writer. Maybe a science writer who covered environmental issues, maybe a public policy person, or a number of other possibilities. But Ben started in, as I said, as an environmental journalist in '74. It didn't take him long before he started to establish himself as a leader in environmental journalism. He established something called the Environmental Forum magazine in 1982. Then he founded a specialty magazine for environmental journalists who were trying to establish this new specialty area called the Environment Forum magazine. I'm sorry, the Environmental Writer in 1988. A year later, he helped establish the Society of Environmental Journalists, SEJ, which is the premier organization up to today of environmental writers. He has been a frequent analyst on NPR's Morning Edition and All Things Considered. After the Iron Curtain fell, a lot of the new nations in Central Europe started establishing real environmental programs for the first time. And anything that goes on in government ought to have journalists looking over their shoulder to make sure the public interest is being served. So Ben went to took on the task and established the Central European Environmental Journalism Forum to help get that organization moving. He administered the Grantham Prize, which for a time was the premier prize for environmental writing in the world. And he was named Climate Change Communicator of the Year in 2009. He continues to work as Michelle said, he is the Yale Climate Connections editor and writes for that organization quite regularly. He's knows more about the environment and forgotten more about the environment than I'll ever learn. So with that said, I think we're incredibly welcome to a person who cares about the environment, cares about our climate, and is one of us, an elder working on these issues often over time. So Bud, take it away.
Thanks very much, Mike, for that generous introduction. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I have to tell you, I have to begin by saying I'm as interested in what you all are doing since I was first introduced to your organization by Michelle, as I hope you'll be interested in my comments. But I hope this won't be it's the first, but I hope it won't be the last of our dialogues together. Just a couple quick nuances. I did start environmental journalism in 1972. In fact, there were 6 legitimate environmental journalists in the country at that time. I happen to know all of them. I always tease that I was the best, but I wasn't. And you don't have to be the best if you're the only one. But I wasn't the only one. There were 6 others. All of them were better than me. As for the Grantham Prize, it was the largest cash award for environmental journalism in the world. It lasted for 7 years. I was pleased to have helped set it up. The winning prize was to journalists was $75,000. That is, and certainly at that time was, it lasted for 7 years, is and was more than most journalists make in a year. So it was a very cherished prize. I think all of us would rather get a Nobel than the Grantham Prize or a Pulitzer, but it was a very prestigious award, and I was thrilled to be associated with it. So I'm real pleased to be here to talk with you. And like I said, I really hope it's not the last time. I'm interested in learning more about your organization, particularly since come January 1st, I too will officially retire, perhaps like many of you. And you know, I'm interested in the next steps in a long career. I did spend about 40 years in environmental journalism in Washington, D.C. I'm okay now, but it was really a fascinating and enjoyable 40 years or so for me now, but I'm recovering. So I guess I wanted to start by just saying some things about you all, and very briefly, you know, I'm curious about where you get your information, because I'm looking at your website, speaking with your group, several members of your group, I guess a week ago, and with Michelle earlier. I'm really impressed, very impressed with what you're doing. And I think there's a great need for what you're doing. And I think you guys are doing a great job of it. But I'm curious where you get your information about climate. Are there 2 or 3 primary principal sources you go to for credible, reliable information on climate change, how to stay current on it? If there are, just throw out a few names so I can get a sense of a little bit of where you are getting your information. Anyway.
Right. But are you asking, would you like people to raise their hands and chime in?
I would appreciate that if they don't mind. I just want 3 or 4 examples, maybe.
All right, anyone? Mike Burke has his hand up. Go ahead, Mike. You're unmuted.
Sure. So there's 2 main publications. I mean, obviously, read the New York Times and the Washington Post daily. So they're both good sources, and they both have online newsletters that focus on climate. And then I've managed to sneak on to Senator Cardin's staff. I used to work for a senator, and I could continue to be able to get some of the publications that are available through his staff subscriptions. And mainly I'm talking about the E&E newsletter, Energy and Environment, which has some great and you know, sort of breaking news about the environment.
Sure. Anyone else?
Yeah, Larry Delos here. RMI is one of the primary sources, Rocky Mountain Institute.
Of course, yes.
And also New York Times has its own climate page. That's very useful for us. So is the New Yorker. Bill McKibben's work. I don't have a list right beside me. I'm one of the contributors to the What's New column of that, and Michelle, of course, as well. Between the 2 of us, I think that's a lot of where it comes from on the What's New column. I can, if you want more information, I have to make a note myself about all of the websites that I get regular mailings from, but they're pretty frequent and numerous, a lot of sources.
Great, thanks very much. Anyone else?
Yeah, Stuart.
Muted, Stu. Here he comes. There he is.
Yes, hi there. Yeah, in addition to everything that's been mentioned, the environmental organizations that a lot of us follow are NRDC, National Wildlife Federation, Audubon, and so forth and so on. So we're getting good information there.
Great, excellent. Well, thanks. That gives me a quick sense. I hope by the end of the day, you'll want to add YaleClimateConnections.org. It's free. It's the site that I founded 15 years ago and still run for the next 4 months, and will stay affiliated in some way after that. But it's another valuable resource. I'll throw out one to you. I don't know if you know about Climate Nexus. Climate Nexus aggregates, and every day, every weekday, comes out with a list of what's been published or broadcast or TV or radio or journals or newspapers or newsletters, whatever. It's free. So go to Climate Nexus. I think it's climatenexus.org, but I'll give it to Michelle later, the URL, just in case. But it's a great aggregating source, and they can tell you who wrote what or who broadcast what in the past 24 hours. So it's definitely a great resource. They will tell you whether there's a fee, whether it's free access to that particular resource. In many cases, they are free, but not in all. But anyway, that's a great aggregator that a lot of professionals in the field, I think, rely on and use. Ask one more question real briefly. Are there specific issues related to climate change that you think are the most fruitful for you to use in your outreach and communications, or just keeping educated on yourself? So I'm talking about, is it wildfires? Is it hurricanes? Is it drought? Is it heat? Is it cold? Is it flooding? What is it? Are there certain particular issues of principal interest among the group here?
Ben and then Steve.
Maybe I'll let Steve go first.
Steve, you're muted. Go ahead. There you go.
I was just going to say grandchildren.
Yeah, good. Oh, great answer. Great answer. Thank you for that.
But we are, among our mission statement is to assist our communities in meeting the goals of the Paris Agreement from 2015.
Sure.
So energy consumption in our communities is a central element. We are finding that we engage our fellow residents with a lot of other ancillary activities, but it's the energy that we are most concerned about ultimately.
Great. They certainly go hand in hand. So thanks for that one also. Anyone else?
Anybody? You can raise your real hand and I can ask to unmute if that makes it easier. Larry, Bill, let's get Bill. I haven't heard from him. So Bill, you need to unmute and then you can chime in.
I was just going to mention the fact that we have very little research about which themes actually work in our particular audience. We've done a little bit of research down here, but I would hesitate to say that, for instance, as much as I respect Larry, I would hesitate to say that the grandchildren are the most effective theme to emphasize. Because we don't know.
Good, thank you.
All right, you have 3 more hands up, bud.
Okay, let's move quickly through them then.
Okay. Charles from Longwood.
So I guess I come at this from the standpoint of a long background in physics and the need to understand energy and its interplay with the environment. And I find it fascinating how difficult a time most people have understanding that interplay. If that makes any sense, I don't know.
It sure does to me, thanks. Anyone else?
Ellen, you need to unmute.
Some of us have been looking for doable projects here and stuff that's needed in our communities. For instance, I think George Alexander might tell you about a project we've been doing, but we've also been pushing our residents to compost. We're working on a plastic bag ban in our geographic area. And maybe George will tell you about the project we've been doing, big project.
Yeah,
Oh, the other thing is we are very much pushing our administration and board to reach climate neutrality by 2050.
Mhm. Great, sure.
All right, Larry, real quick.
Yeah, just quickly, uh, grandchildren, absolutely. I double underline that. That's why I'm in this business myself. But take a look, Bud, at our newsletters. We have 4 or 5 of them out now, or we're on our 5th. And Ruth Crawford is our editor. She has systematically just put together a list of the issues that we dealt with in each newsletter. And so you'll find there a really excellent little list of all of the issues that we dealt with that come up from our membership. So that'll give you a good sense of what our concerns are as members as well.
I'll definitely do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
I'll say there's one that wasn't mentioned that I'm a little bit surprised wasn't, and that is extreme weather. There is a lot of data on messaging. As you know, I know you met with Catherine Hayhoe, a good friend of mine, and she's invaluable. But another great resource, I don't know if you're familiar with it, there's a little bit of tooting a horn. I have a conflict of interest here, disclose that. But Yale and George Mason University, George Mason was a client, Yale still is, they produce something called the 6 Americas studies. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but all you need to do is Google 6 Americas and Yale. And it will bring you to a resource of studies on what works and what doesn't work in talking with others, friend or foe, about climate change. It also has a fascinating map that will allow you to go in and put in a town, a street, not a street, a county, a city, a state, and find out what people in those districts, including, important here, listen tight, congressional districts, in what people in those congressional districts think or about 13 different climate issues. Is it happening? Is it human caused? Is it mostly bad or potentially good? Is it affordable? Should we do more research on renewables, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the 6 America study does provide a lot of specific data on which messages sell best to which audiences. And take a look at that 6 America studies. It's really a Bible for many people. So let me move from there. The reason I thought weather, most people get most of their impressions, mistaken or otherwise, about climate change from weather. Now, you all know that climate and weather are 2 different things. One's local and short-lived, the other's global and long-lived. One's in our backyard, one's in the globe's backyard. So there are tons of differences. But like it or not, most people get most of their impression about climate change or global warming based on weather in their backyard. And we have found through our research that connecting weather in the discussions, in particular extreme weather, so it can be any one of the long list I read earlier, severe heat, heat domes, flooding, drought, wildfires, take the list, storm surge, sunny day flooding, any one of those, sea level rise, those are excellent tickets into talking with people about climate change, because we've all got views on weather and we all experience weather. If you do that, the number one misstep to avoid, and I'm sure Catherine would touch on this, but the number one misstep to avoid is, the question is not, did climate change cause that storm? It's the wrong question. The correct question was, is there any connection between climate change and that storm? Was climate change a factor in the background? And here, if I can use a sports metaphor for just a moment, many of us who have played basketball or once did know that the rim is 10 feet from the floor. If you raise the floor to 8 feet, the rim being 8 feet away, a lot more people can dunk than they can at 10 feet. The same applies with climate change. If you're starting from a warmer temperature, in particular, if you're starting from warmer SSTs, that's sea surface temperatures, which we are, the oceans are warming, it's an easier dunk. than it was when the foundation was back at 10 feet away. So that metaphor is frequently useful in this context, I think. But weather is clearly a good issue to consider putting into your toolbox, your quiver. It's an effective arrow in communicating on climate change. Frequently, it leads to debunking, because some people say, well, you know, as a matter of fact, we all have seen examples. Well, you know, it rained yesterday, and it's February 14th, and it's supposed to snow. No, that's weather. That's not climate. You know, here's one other metaphor you may have heard. Weather, we pick what we're wearing based on weather. We buy our wardrobe based on climate. So wardrobe is for climate. What we wear today is for weather. That's another metaphor that frequently I find to be useful. Let me transition to everybody's favorite recent subject for good reasons, and that's the somewhat Orwellian named Inflation Reduction Act. Okay, it probably is going to reduce inflation. Certainly you get a lot more votes for it in a closely divided House and Senate if you call it the Inflation Reduction Act, rather than if you call it the Paris Climate Agreements Objectives Act. So there are reasons for, they named it Inflation Reduction Act. But let's get beyond that. The Inflation Reduction Act is clearly a milestone. It is an incredible accomplishment, due largely to the efforts of a few key individuals, most of them in the Senate, none more than Chuck Schumer. I mean, whoever thought Chuck Schumer could legislate? You know, I was starting to question whether he could, and I'll be damned. You know, obviously, Joe Manchin came along at the very end, Johnny come lately, but obviously it was critical to get his support. Frequently unrecognized in this effort is Ron Wyden, of liberal from Oregon, liberal Democrat from Oregon. Wyden too was key in the background in getting Manchin on board, and frequently he doesn't get enough credit for that. Obviously, in the House, you couldn't afford much wavering. There was none. You all know, no Republican votes in the House or Senate, solid Democratic votes in the House and Senate. And of course, we all did know that the Speaker is excellent in keeping her forces in line. So she clearly deserves a lot of credit also. There are things that, and are you ready for this? The Inflation Reduction Act is not a perfect piece of legislation. I don't know that there ever has been a perfect piece of legislation, whether it's the Civil Rights Act or Social Security or any number of statutes. If it goes more than 2 words, it's probably not going to be perfect. And it is by no means a perfect piece of legislation. What it is an incredible accomplishment. At the last minute, nobody, no talking head, no pundit in Washington 4 weeks before enactment would have predicted that it could have happened. And none could have predicted that the outcome could be as positive a piece of legislation as that one is, with all its flaws, with all its limitations, with all that it didn't accomplish, an amazing piece of legislative accomplishment. And I think more than anyone else, Schumer deserves an awful lot of credit for that. It will do 2 key things, and these are critical. One, it will provide incentives. It will incentivize clean energy. It will incentivize additional substantial amounts of funding for clean energy efforts. That's one thing that's really critical. The second critical thing it will do is it gives the US standing again in the international community. We might have claimed at one point to be a global leader on climate change. Obviously, during the Trump administration, we could not claim that and did not claim that straight-faced. It now puts us back in the game to be among the international leaders on climate change. We still have a lot to prove to earn that back, but it gives us, we're back in the game as a result. Those are 2 of the major things that law accomplished. It also accomplished a transition from dirty fossil fuels to clean renewable energy. It also gave a big boost to electrification and clean, not dirty coal-fired power plants, but clean electrification. However, if you, like me, were wishing to go out in my senior days while I still have a license that my kids have not taken from me, and get a new Hyundai Ioniq or Chevy Bolt or any number of EVs, get in line. It opened the pathway, but the floodgates are not open yet. It's going to be years before people can buy the EV of their choice, particularly if it's not a Chevy Bolt or one of the few American-made and assembled vehicles. So it's going to be extremely tight for a number of years. If you want to get, I talked to a Hyundai dealer recently. He said, well, if you want one, get in line, it'll be 3 to 5 years before you can get that car. At least that's in Virginia. You can get some further north and you can get the charging stations installed. But it's going to be a long time before that dream becomes a reality. I guess it's safe to call the Inflation Reduction Act, as it was passed with such narrow margins in such a hostile political climate, both in, especially in the Senate, but also in the House. It is a miracle that we got a piece of legislation that good out of this Congress and during this time. So it's not to be ignored. There are great resources evaluating it section by section. I know I sent to Michelle and her colleagues a video that is one of the best. If you've seen it or not seen it yet, you're aware that it's rapid fire, really talking fast. So you really, use whatever you can to slow it down. And listen to it 3 or 4 times, but it's extremely worthwhile. I think it's 20 minutes, as I recall. But there are other great resources, including some that we published on our own site, I should say. Again, I think the take-home messages from that law are it incentivizes clean energy, it provides money for clean energy R&D, it provides lots of money for electrification, clean electrification, including installation of charging stations, not only in one's own garage or backyard, but also on the highways. It does all those things. It's not going to have a major effect on EV purchases as quickly as we would like. The other thing, of course, is it puts us back at the game in an international level. We have standing again because of that. The other thing that the Inflation Reduction Act does is it opens the way for more, I'll call it mischief, because there was some mischief that proponents of the legislation got into the final language a little bit too late for Joe Manchin to say, well, wait, that's not what we agreed to. So there was some mischief, and that does raise the possibility that Manchin's fur will be up on his back again, and that he could become a little bit less cooperative going forward. But there's some things that snuck in that basically almost come to reversing the recent Supreme Court decision, 6-3, of course, in West Virginia v. EPA, which basically meant that the EPA could not regulate coal-fired power plants collectively. It had to do within the fence line, the power plant at a time, rather than more broadly saying, let's all shift to renewables. So that the bill does reverse some say a lot of the impact of that. It also leaves open other opportunities for new litigation if they can get it passed. That'll depend on what happens 2 months from yesterday in November. But it does open other possibilities for new legislative initiatives. So those are major accomplishments of the Inflation Reduction Act. I don't want to spend much time on this other subject. And certainly we can go back to the law and its implications in Q&A. I want to touch very briefly on who, when, where, how, and why to discuss this subject. Don't bother discussing it with those who are uneducable. You're not going to win them over. It's a waste of your time, effort, and energy and intellect. It's not worth it. They may be 20% of the volume, 30% of the, of some newscast still in terms of volume and energy, but they're only 7 or 8% of the US public at this point. They're not worth it. We don't need 99% of Americans on board. We don't need 198 countries on board to get Paris. We need the right 20 countries, the right 24 countries, and we need the right 51% of the public. We don't need 90% of the public to get our way. And the Inflation Reduction Act is a perfect example of that. So don't waste your time on them. Also, you don't have to convince those who are already convinced, those who already understand and accept the science. Also, when you discuss this issue, do not underscore it, do not exaggerate the scientific background on this or the economic impacts. You don't have to exaggerate them. You do yourself harm. You do the issue, the goals harm if you exaggerate them, because the truth is convincing enough. So don't be tempted to overstate, oh yeah, that storm was definitely caused by climate change, when it may or may not have been. It was certainly influenced, blah, blah, blah. But don't exaggerate the science. Don't exaggerate the economic impact. If you don't believe me on economic impact, go to our site at 3 o'clock today, when we will post a new piece on what's called the social cost of carbon. Social cost of carbon is a critical economic consideration. 24 researchers have come out with a study saying it's 3.6 times worse than the current social cost of carbon, which is about $51. It's not 51, it's actually 185. This is for damages avoided, climate change damages avoided per ton of CO2. So we have a piece coming out, it'll be posted today by Dana Nucatelli, a great reporter. And it basically says, not only is it 3.6 times more than what the Obama administration and so far the Biden administration have interpreted to be social cost of carbon, but it's 30 times more than Trump had reduced it to. So it's a critical factor. It's among the most important research items, certainly to come out in 2022. It was published in Nature. What could go wrong? Let me transition a bit to reality, strengths and unique strengths of seniors, as yourselves and as am I. And I know some of your colleagues may have shared with you my passion for Arthur Brooks's book. It's called From Strength to Strength. I think it's $16 from Amazon now. An incredible read. I'm a slow reader, particularly if it's not dealing with climate change issues. But I read Arthur Brooks's book in no time at all. I read it twice within a period of 6 weeks. I've also championed it to others in our age group and retirement status, including a number of Nobel Prize winning climate scientists, MacArthur Genius climate scientists who, like us, are getting a little bit old between the teeth and are basically retired or considering retirement. And they're worried. How do they get to retirement? Read Arthur Brooks, From Strength to Strength. I never read a book where I felt so convinced that the author was talking to me personally. Each page, each chapter, I said, God, he's talking to me. No wonder I read it twice. The other one, Bill McKibben mentioned earlier, Bill's recent book. I forget the exact name. Well, he refers to himself as a graying American. I notice you all identify yourselves as green, graying, and still here. So Bill is also a graying American. Read his most recent book. We do have a great book review we published about it, and I'm going to send it to Michelle so she can forward that to you if you're interested in reading the review. It should whet your appetite to read the whole book. McKibben's obviously a legend, And this review looks not only at his most recent book, Views of a Graying American, but also at how he got there through his evolution from a youngster. One thing I want to not critique, but I want to point to comments on your own website, because one of the first things you say in your mission statement is educating retired folks. And I said, oh boy, that's short-sighted, until I got to the end of the quote there, where he said, work alongside younger generations. I said, oh, good. They've got the younger generations in there, the grandchildren, so to speak. However, I think you guys are in a great position to educate the younger generation, not only work with them, but you bring wisdom and experience. You may not be as proficient as they are on social media or TikTok or Facebook or whatever it is, but you've got the wisdom and experience that they just don't have yet. And that's what Arthur Brooks hammers home in his book. So I think educating youngsters is a key activity for you all. And I think a real critical question is, should you do it individually, but one-on-one, or do you do it as a group? Throw out an idea. Maybe you should partner with the youth counterpart to your own organization, one of the youth counterparts. I recently adopted as a mentor a brilliant young high school graduate who decided to take a gap year before she started college. She has written very honestly about her own mental health challenges, her own eating disorders, and her own passion and fears about what's happening to our climate. A beautiful essay she wrote, we published it. And her name is Michelina Schock. Michelina just started 3 weeks ago, maybe it's the 4th week now, as an undergraduate at Emory University, a great university in Atlanta. And she straightened out her mental health concerns, and she's working on her eating disorder issues. And I've worked one-on-one with her. Nothing's been more rewarding in my life. I'm currently working with a high school senior, Ava Akbarian, who's also very active, has published, has done summer field trips and summer internships with a lot of the right organizations, both domestic and international. So I personally like working with individuals, but working with groups also can provide big dividends. And I think you're in a great position to do that. I know we're short on time. Let me see if there's one or two last things I want to say before taking any questions. Oh, an activity, maybe a couple activities you might consider. Somebody wrote to us recently and said, you know, there are no, I drive around my neighborhood, I see vote for Smith, vote for Jackson, vote for Thompson, vote for Brown. I don't see vote for the climate. Nobody's got to vote for climate change posters in their backyard or in the front yard. And I said, that's interesting, because I live in a very red area of Virginia, northern neck of Virginia, about 150 miles southeast of Washington, D.C., now on the Chesapeake. And I see a lot of posters. I need only look at the yard, the garage next to me. Sometimes I fear people will think it's on my property. You know what it says? Trump was right. That's in probably 48 point font print. And down at the bottom it says about everything. I mean, give me a break. Name one president ever who's been right about everything. I don't think it's Donald Trump, last I read. But you know, maybe there's a market for climate change action engagement signs, posters for front yards. The other thing is plant a tree, put a label on it. Say this tree, it might look like an elm, it might look like a redwood, it might look like a dogwood, but it's a carbon sink. And we need more carbon sinks. Plant some trees around your property, a great community activity. There's a get this straight, in Waco, Texas, there's a great effort among a particular organization, Waco Friends of the Climate, to bring up crepe myrtles, put them out and get them out there. They're providing them free to the community of Waco. They've got 400 trees they're giving away, and they do it in the name of climate change education. So maybe that's another idea, just to toss out. Maybe that's enough. Michelle,
let's open the floor for
Sure.
questions. Thank you very much, Bud. This has been inspiring and stimulating. So if people have questions, why please raise your yellow hand or waggle your hand broadly, and between myself and Michelle will call on you.
George first.
Yeah, a comment rather than a question. One of the interesting features of the IRA, which has received very little comment so far in the press, you're speaking to a group of people here who all live in nonprofit communities. The IRA supports the direct payment of incentives for solar and other renewable activities to nonprofits. In the past, if we wanted solar to be funded at our communities, we generally had to enter into a power purchase agreement with a company that needed the tax write-off, and it was very indirect, and we didn't get most of the benefits. Now we can get the benefit directly in terms of payment through this act. And it's a small bit of a very complicated piece of legislation, but for folks like us, it's really important.
Fantastic. I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm sure there are other gems to be found in those 750 pages. Thanks for mentioning that one.
Mhm. All right. Charlotte from Collington, you're muted. There you go.
Since we have access to all these seniors, I would suggest that instead of getting excited about buying an electric powered car, that we consider just how much we drive. If it's not very much, we might do our climate a big favor by hanging on to our old gas cars, because if we trade them in, they will be bought for cheap by somebody younger who's going to really put a lot of miles on them. So that's my thought. What do you think of that, Mr. Buck?
I think it's an excellent point. Well taken.
Thank you, Charlotte. Stu and then Bob. You're muted, Stu. Takes a minute to, there you go.
But I want to thank you for sending that video by the fast talking young man.
Yes.
That was really terrific. I've sent it to friends and family, and I've listened to it more than once. And the thing about the misnamed Inflation Reduction Act that I am always listening for very carefully, but in the press, it doesn't get a lot of notice. And the sexy things do, like solar and wind and electrification, but also in the bill is a lot. At our Kendalls, we're trying very hard to tackle our big energy user here, which is the heating and cooling of our buildings. And there's a lot in this act that does exactly that. Things like energy efficient windows, doors, water heaters, air conditioning, and insulation and air sealing. All these things do a lot to shrink the load. There's a lot of talk about electrification, but if we don't shrink the load considerably, there's almost not enough rooftops or deserts or, to put windmills and solar. So I think it's not as, it's somewhat prosaic and it's very hard work, but it's conservation first to get the load down, and then the putting on the renewables will be less.
Yeah, absolutely. Every microgram of carbon monoxide not added is a cause of celebration. It's justification for celebration. We're not going to level off at 1.5. We're not going to level off at 2 centigrade. But every carbon monoxide molecule not emitted is a cause for us to celebrate after that, because it keeps going up. And 2 is a lot worse than 1.5, but 2.1 is worse than 2. And so we're going to declare victory, have many victories along the way even while we're not reaching those ideal aspirational goals, if I could call them that.
Bob,
But I'm happy that you mentioned the language amending the Clean Air Act in terms of the West Virginia versus EPA decision. It is an important issue, and we know that the Biden administration has proposed its own rather ambitious set of initiatives to improve regulation, and I think this is critical. But we all know, because we experienced the last administration, that regulations can be reversed. And so I think that one of the issues that we need to think about is this whole question of how we preserve any gains in the area of regulations and administrative policy, because of course a lot of what the changes that are necessary are going to have to come from the private industry. And what private industry wants to know is there's a stable environment in which they can continue to move towards a green initiatives.
Absolutely. The private sector really wants certainty, or as close as we can come to certainty. And keep in mind that even, you're right that regulations can be reversed, but even when they're not ultimately reversed, they almost always, certainly with climate, will be subject to litigation and delay. So, you know, it's the next best option. You know, I guess as Churchill said, Americans always do the right thing after they've exhausted all their other remedies. But, you know, regulation is going to be critical, but it's going to be an uphill battle. It's not going to be fast with regulation. It's almost as bad as an executive order. And, you know, I mean, let's face it, how November goes, the elections, I hate to be political here, but how November goes is going to influence in major ways what the Biden administration or any successor administration does on climate issues, whether it's litigation or legislation or regulation or whatever. I think, you know, people always say, what can I as an individual do? What's the most important thing? Well, the most important thing, quite frankly, in the least political sense I can possibly say it, is elect representatives, senators who appreciate science. I don't care if they say, I believe in the Paris Agreement. If they appreciate and respect science, they're going to come down on the right side of the issues, on a whole bunch of issues. So you don't have to be a Democrat or a Republican to appreciate science, or do you? But I wish they would basically say, that's what we need. We need legislators who understand the scientific method, who understand the virtues in peer-reviewed processes with all their weaknesses. But anyway, that's where I'd put my money on them. They'll come out fine on climate.
okay, one more and then we have to move on. Larry from Hanover, you're muted.
Just a quick note, Bill McKibben's book title is The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon.
Yes.
That speaks to the three issues that he focuses on in that piece. I wrote a review of it for Yes Magazine.
Okay.
And there's a new review in the fresh New York Times book review, written by the great Timothy Egan. Wonderful reviews, a terrific writer. So just FYI.
Egan's a great reporter. Yeah, I'm going to send you our review, which is done by a George Washington University scholar. And I will tell you, on the video that I sent to you that was mentioned earlier, I sent it out to, let's say, 400 or 500 of my best friends. And I'm amazed at how many of them who are with faculty said, this is going into my my course for my fall class. So it's really getting some good play, that video. It's a treasure. Well, thanks again for having me. I hope it's not our last exchange. I'll soon perhaps be eligible for membership in your organization, even though I don't live in a retirement community yet, and even though I'm probably more I'm not Quaker, but you know, if it's open to membership to heathens like me, that's an exaggeration. But if it's open to non-members, I may well be among you in the future.
Thank you so much, Bud. Send me anything you want to, and I will include it in a follow-up email with all of the resources mentioned so far as well. And yes, you can go to our homepage and sign up. You will be on our contact list. And as soon as we reach out to external CCRCs and members, you would be a member. But for now, you will get our newsletters and our action alerts, and stay in touch with us.
Well, again, thanks for taking the time. I know we went over and I really appreciate it. Thanks so much to all of
Thank you.
Keep up the good and important work.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
very
you so
much.
much.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, Bud.
Okay, we're going to move along with our meeting.